Ongi etorri Gutun Zuria Bilbao, letren nazioarteko jaialdira. Jarraian, literatura genero fluidoak, ez fikziotik fikziora, izeneko solasaldia izango da, KIRMEN URIBE eta Sara Mesa idazleen artean. Bi egileak euskal idazlearen azken eleberritik abiatuko dira, La vida anterior de los delfines, 21. mende honetan literatur generoen arteko mugak zabaltzeko, bilaketaren eta ezarritako arauen austuraren mende honetan alegia. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Festival Internacional de las Letras. A continuación tendrá lugar la conversación titulada Géneros literarios fluidos, de la no ficción a la ficción, entre el escritor KIRMEN URIBE y la escritora Sara Mesa. En este encuentro, ambos autores partirán de la última novela del escritor vasco, La vida anterior de los delfines, para abordar la difusión de los límites entre los géneros literarios en este siglo XXI, el siglo de la búsqueda y de la ruptura de las normas establecidas.
Bueno, arratsaldeon.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here in Bilbao once again during the pandemic. Well, we can now start to say goodbye to the pandemic and we can finally meet in person. And for writers, it's always a pleasure to be in contact with readers. Because at the end of the day, our work is very lonely. We work at home. And really, this contact with readers is something we writers need. We need to feel this warmth. That's why I feel extremely happy to be here with all of you and to be here in the presence of Sara Mesa. I'm a big fan of yours, Sara. By the way, fan is a term that is also used in Basque and in Spanish. Sara is a wonderful writer. And also a very kind, gentle, and nice person. It's a pleasure for me to be here participating in this literature festival with KIRMEN. Thank you to the organizers. Hey, wow, we have amazing participants here with us that will help us stick to the allotted times. Well, the title of our conversation talks about the differences between fiction and non-fiction, or rather, what brings these two genres together. What do we really understand by when we talk about fiction, non-fiction? How do we interpret fiction, non-fiction? What are the ties? I'm a fiction writer, although I sometimes write non-fiction. And I was thinking about your last book, La vida anterior de los delfines, a book that I've recently finished reading. And I was reflecting on your career, and you often base your plots on real characters that have existed, real stories, then you document yourself, and then you craft books that are novels. They aren't essays, they are non-fiction books or history books, but rather novels. And I'd like to ask you about this process, whether it's spontaneous in nature, yes, no? How do you craft this? And this balance between fiction, non-fiction, how do you strike a balance? How does your mind face this literary creative process? Well, I always start from scratch for each book. I put the clock at 0, the timer at 0. And each book is different. You finish your previous piece of work, and then it flies away, you forget about that novel, and then you start once again from zero, from scratch. You still start filling up your mind with the new novel. My previous novel, La hora de despertarnos juntos, Elkarrekin ordua, my previous novel was aimed at telling facts, the truth. Like Claudia Rankine, Afro-American in the United States, an amazing poet that does non-fiction poetry, and that exists, believe it or not. So basically she narrates facts, true facts, and she wants the readers to know that what she's describing is true, is real, and she does poetry with facts. And that's what I attempted to do with my previous novel. I wanted to cover a loophole that existed in the Basque history, and I wanted to narrate what happened during the 40s. The resistance in the 40s and the life of a real amazing woman. And I wanted the reader to know that what I was telling was true. But in this case, in La vida anterior de los delfines, in my new novel, the situation is different. In this case, I started researching some files, some archives, some documents, and a real woman that I wanted to rescue from oblivion. This is the life of Rita Schiemann, a suffragette, Hungarian Jewish suffragette who tried to stop World War I. She had an interview with President Wilson. An amazing figure. And she had 14 minutes to interview the president in the White House. And President Ford organized this vessel from the United States to Europe to try to stop the war. Well, unsuccessfully. She was a friend, of many intellectuals, and she was an intellectual herself. But during the Cold War, well, she passed away in 1948, by the way, and unfortunately she fell into oblivion. What did the States promote during the Cold War? She was a peacemaker and a feminist. And back in the day, the United States was in the war race, nuclear weapons, and of course, how did they see women as homemakers? Fridge, toaster, car, home. So she fell into oblivion, this lady, until her secretary, a friend and lover, Edith Wiener, tried to collect facts and wrote a 10,000 autobiography. And then there came a Basque who reopened those thousands of papers in a library. And the first part of the novel tells the life of Rosita Schiemann, all the research that I had to do regarding her life. And this lady was silenced. She fell into oblivion, and we only had documents on her political activities. But what about her personal life? Who did she love? Unknown. Was she happy? Was she sad? Nothing was known. So what I did was try to rescue her intimate, emotional side. And so I researched her family that traveled from the Basque Country to New York. I studied how they settled in New York. That covers the first part of the book. And the second part of the book, as you know, well, the first part is narrated by Ori, and the second part takes a step back, and it is the partner of the writer who narrates the story. So the first part is not self-fiction. Well, it's not autofiction. It isn't autofiction. I mean, this is like a buzzword these days. But it isn't autofiction or self-fiction. It's an autobiography. Everything that we can see there is about her. Facts. But the second part is about Nora. So here, I basically adopt a different voice. Here we're talking about a fluid literary genre. And that's when I deep dive into fiction and I change voice. I no longer speak as KIRMEN URIBE. And this frees me in my creation. I start flying. And that's when fiction characters crop up. And that's the part of the book that I most enjoyed because I wasn't so tied up. I wasn't so handcuffed to documents. I didn't have to be true and loyal to an individual, a person who was silenced, an amazing person, Rosita Schliemann. It was, about time for someone to resurface her story. But when you talk about real person that exists in real life, you're handcuffed. You're tied. You cannot be 100% free. Although we always do fiction. We always do fiction because there are things you don't know and you need to imagine, of course. You need to imagine how she spoke to Wilson, what conversation they held, how he dressed, how she dressed, or how Henry Ford was, how he behaved. And that information needs to be invented. That's fiction, ladies and gentlemen. But the second part of the book has been very freeing for me. And at the end of the day, it's like a journey from nonfiction to fiction. And I think I'll leave it there. And I'll stay in fiction from now onwards, I believe. Perhaps I can say this too loud. But I'm starting to have the temptation of, leaving behind historic figures and documents and facts. It's true that there has been a global trend worldwide. Carré, for example, who has wanted to narrate real-life stories. But fiction is nothing short of extraordinary, don't you think? Yes, I agree. Well, of course, there's always a mishmash of everything in all books. And here we're talking about fluid genre. There's no pure fiction, 100% fiction or 100% non-fiction. No, that doesn't exist. You mentioned Carrère. I'm very much interested in his work. And what you do is also very appealing, very interesting to me. But of course, one thing is wearing the hat of the writer as opposed to the hat of the reader. In my case, my feeling of wanted to fly. You say that in the second part of your novel, you were freed, you felt that you could fly. My books stem from reality. I mean, you aren't born out of, vacuum, about the void. No, everything that I produce has to do with what surrounds me. But I don't talk about real environments. I live in Seville, and when I write books, I never specify that the action is set, the plot is set in Seville. I don't need to mention that, because that would handcuff me. That ties me. That has a toll. That has, an impact. And honestly, I don't feel comfortable with that. You need to understand where you want to place yourself. Even if I know a city very well, like the city of Seville, I've been living in Seville since I was born. And when I'm creating a book and I'm thinking about a character, in a specific street at a specific time of the day, I'm imagining all the details, and when I imagine so many details, that really distorts, distracts me, and I don't like to tie my characters, my plot to a specific place, although it's true that my books are very much anchored in reality. You talked about truth earlier and about facts, but for me, the fact that facts are true or genuine doesn't mean that they have to be, verified, historically verified. We can find truth in fiction. I mean, there's truth in fiction. Different kinds of truth is what we find in fiction. And that's something that one can achieve through writing, right? Through creation. And I consider myself to be a writer that is very, very close to fiction. I mean, 100% fiction doesn't exist. And I have examples of things that I've written that are very close to nonfiction. I can talk about that a bit later on. Now I'll pass on the baton to you. And I'd like you to expand on something that you mentioned earlier. In your last book, you appear. I don't know if they call you Uri. Uri comes from Uribe. Your colleagues, your friends call you Uri. I didn't know that. You're present in your book, but you have modified your name a bit. That helps you, establish a distance, but you appear there as a writer who writes a book, and that underscores the meta-literary nature of the book. A book is an artifact, right? And that is positive. As a reader, I mean, what I want is, of course, the book to be interesting and well written, but when I write, I don't want anyone to, notice that I was writing. I want people to forget that there was someone writing that. I want readers, when reading the book, to, be immersed in the book and this plot as if they were living that experience themselves. I don't know what opinion you have about this distinction. In your specific case, talking about the process within the book, is it that positive for you? This is a literary tradition that comes from, long ago, and they're from Truman Capote. They also appear in the creative process. How do you consulted the files, the documents, and not appear in the novel? What would have been the difference as opposed to what you ultimately created? Why did you decide to appear presently in your book? What's the emotional reasoning behind this? Well, let me think. Or was it recent? Perhaps it wasn't deliberate because maybe I'm asking you questions you never ask yourself about. Many times when I'm asked questions, I really need to think it over because many times the decisions I make when I'm writing are 100% spontaneous. And sometimes we're not really aware of what we do when we create. I don't know whether it was recent, deliberate decision of yours, or was it spontaneous? No, it was recent. It was matured. It was deliberate. I didn't want to narrate the life of Rosita Schumann, or not just her life, rather. I wanted to narrate the life of a family that moves from one country to another. That's the story that I narrate. Wow. But when you traveled there, you still didn't have that info, right? You traveled to New York thinking that you're going to write about her, or did you know that from the beginning? No, I knew that from the onset, but you didn't know what you were going to expect to find. No, I didn't, of course. I was traveling to research about her, but my book wasn't about her. The project that I presented to the public library in New York was basically the project of a transatlantic novel, where I was going to build a bridge between the unfinished book of the partner of Rosita and the 90s or 80s in the city, and that's what appealed to them. They told me, "Wow, how interesting!" And it's interesting, this bridge that you want to build. We're interested, they told me, about your vision of Rosika, sorry. They were interested in this link between her life and my life. So I wanted to experiment. I want to think, okay, what happens in the mind of a writer when you open those boxes? What happens? What crops up? What comes to mind? And I jotted down all my thoughts. So just as Rosika's Swimmer did, basically traveling from Europe to New York, that's what I did. I did that journey, and then I jotted down all my thoughts, what I experienced, what I felt. And this gives a whole new dimension to the novel. Rosika wins, and we win as well, because we are creating like a mirror game. The book is full of mirror games. What happened to Rosika happened to my aunt. What happened to my older sister happened to my son. It's like a mirror game. There's like a neuronal structure. We have 2 lines that then transform into 3, into 5, then become 2, turn around. And all of this was perfectly plotted. I mean, I'm a perfect plotter myself. And I, do my side brainstorm. I had a very clear idea of the novel in mind. I had a clear idea from the very beginning. I thought I need 3 voices. First, Uri, second, Nora, and third voice, children, the children. That was very clear in my mind. But then, of course, you need to execute that. You need to make that happen. Oh my goodness. I mean, you can have it in your mind, but then you need to jot it down. You need to draft it. You need to make it happen. And it needs to happen. It needs to work. So yes, the novel makes sense to the extent that, provided that there's this connection between New York and the Basque Country. Without this connection, it wouldn't, make sense. Rosita, Judith, Anne, Maider are like the same character that journeys on, that, changes body. I don't know if that sounds a bit weird, awkward, right? Well, how about you? How do you create your characters? Is there a component of Sarah in your characters, and Natalia, for example? Well, Alice Munro, an amazing writer that I admire, Alex Munro says that everything we produce is autobiographic, but not in the narrated facts, but rather in the vision of the world, the atmosphere, the emotional layer that underlies the story, the plot. You were describing your novel, and you were saying that you had a very clear structure in mind, that of course then you need to execute, that you had a very clear idea. But when I write, I have some general ideas, but it's not that clear for me. My books are done as I write them, as I craft them. I build them as I build them. I don't have that predetermined idea of my books. It's work in progress that unfolds. It's all fiction through my lens, where I come from, my background, my gender. I never decouple, these elements. I don't believe in imagination and muses, no. Everything stems from the inside, from deep inside me. I'm not tied to premises, to facts. But there was an opposite case, and from which I learned a great deal. I wrote this small book, very short book, but should I recommend one of my books to others? I'm always really shy. I don't really like to talk about my work, but I'm really proud about this small book called Silencio Administrativo, Administrative Silence. I don't know whether it's an essay chronicle. It's a very short book that was published by Anagrama as part of the Nuevos Cuadernos series, and it tells the real life of a woman I met, a homeless woman. And one day I was talking to her, and I tried to help her perceive the minimum wage. And I thought that she didn't have the, possibility of doing the administrative, paperwork. And I thought, okay, I need to give this lady a helping hand so that she could receive this minimum wage. And this is something that happened to me in my life. And then a publisher told me, why don't you narrate that story? It was really a journey for me. I learned a great deal. I thought I didn't have any prejudice regarding the homeless. And I understood that we all have, preconceived ideas. And I want to share my personal journey, my learnings with my readers. And I thought, how can I narrate this? And I thought, oh my goodness, I cannot write a novel on this because I can't put myself in the shoes of this lady. Fortunately for me, I don't know what living out on the street is. I don't know what it is to endure the cold, hunger. So I thought, okay, I'm going to narrate her story from a different perspective. And I decided to write a chronicle with real facts, changing her name for confidentiality reasons. And then I understood that I wasn't able to do that. I had to rescue the way I narrate fiction and had to use my instruments, my tools, my assets as a writer. It's true that everything I narrate or tell is true, and what's different doesn't affect the truthfulness of that which I'm narrating. I approached this woman, and it wasn't just me, it was a friend and I. But when I wrote the book, I said just one person had approached the lady. It worked better in narrative terms to narrate in the first person. It wasn't even Sara, it was Beatriz. This is fiction. So there are some fictional elements. As we often say, if you tell things as they are, nobody will believe you. You need to change them so that reality is easier to digest. So this woman had to endure a great deal, and I was completely unable to write her story without boring, readers to death. So I crafted, the book. I combined conversations. It was a very interesting creative process for me in writing this story, and of course, I wanted to convey the truth of this woman. And in this book, I make statements that are based on my opinion, not my experience. And in this specific case, I needed resources. And let me explain myself. Resources that come from my experience as a writer. And it was very interesting for me. And I always say that there's always, a pinch of fiction in nonfiction and a pinch of nonfiction in fiction. Yeah, I completely agree. Otherwise, it won't work. Same thing happened to me with my previous novel.
Real, ¿no?
It was also about a real life. Carmel Urresti and Txomin Letamendi, the husband, incredible couple. Txomin Letamendi, he was from Bilbao. He would play jazz, the trumpet. Well, an amazing man. He was a spy as well. An amazing story. And the family of Carmeli Urresti, they had a house in a village by the coast, Andarroa. Then they lost the boats, the house, but only later. But the father, he heard a rumor of people in a stormy day like today, and he realized that there was a woman with some children under a car. And this is a woman that ran away from her home with the children, with her children. So this man hosted this shelter, this woman, and they gave them a room in the house, and they stayed there to live for a while, things that we used to do in the past. So I said, I'm going to tell the story from the point of view of one of these children. And then the novel will start with this image of the children under the car and the rain falling. So that day, this man sheltered us. And that is how my story was going to start. But it didn't work. It didn't work. So it is a pity. Because I had so many data and details and the police reports and the war assessment from the trial. And I wanted everything to be like that. And if the narrator was a boy or a girl under the cart, then that would get a new dimension. And then maybe you're saying, it is a pity you didn't write such a novel. But something, a voice inside me would say, no, it doesn't work like that. So I said, okay, no, you are narrating the story, KIRMEN URIBE. You're going to tell the story with all the data and the information you know, with all your letters or details. Well, it was because it didn't work. And in this new novel, I didn't pay attention to the documents. Noah does not appear in any document. We have different scenes about their lives, but I sort of took some distance.
Esa tentación de meter cosas del archivo, porque...
So, when you find things, you go like, wow, this is super good. And you think that readers are going to like it. But it's not always the case. And what you said about these papers, then just remind me of this trial of Roshika Schwimmer. And this, I've reproduced it as it is, literally. And this was this trial when she wanted to become an American citizen. He would not get the citizenship, then she appealed, and then the attorney asked her, Miss Schwimmer, would you take the arms to defend the estates? And she said no. So then she didn't get the citizenship. And then in the Second World War, and this is a very difficult moment in the novel, she could not host her relatives that were Jews and were dying in Europe. But at the same time, I also talk about all the red taping you have to go through in order to keep on living in the States. Sometimes you think nobody's going to renew your visa, but then suddenly, boom, you get a letter and they say, yes, it's okay, you can stay. So this runs parallel to what she lived, to what she went through. I've been told we have to leave some time for a Q&A with the audience. I don't see the audience, but if you want to intervene, please raise your hands. And I guess somebody will hand you over a wireless microphone. Do you have questions in the audience?
Esto es
Bueno,
curioso.
si hay alguien ahí y si alguien quiere preguntar algo, pues que levante la mano y supongo que le pasan el micro. Y... Vale, pues no...
Lo del marcador me recuerda a mi hija juega al fútbol allá en Nueva York. El fútbol femenino allá.
My daughter, she plays football, and there it is even more important that male football. And this is how it goes. Football over there, you have the countdown. That was funny to me. Any questions? This question is for Sara Mesa. How do you approach the psychological conflict in your characters? They always have something that is troublesome. I think you do not plan your novels because you do not know exactly from the beginning where they're aiming at. Do you rather approach it as a search? And then you solve the characters' conflicts through this research or otherwise? This is my question.
Lo primero, tenía que haber empezado por daros la...
First of all, I should have said thank you, by the way, for your contributions and for sharing your time with us and how you work. Well, thank you to you, says Sara. Well, this is a difficult question. Because constructing a character, I think it is a very organic process. I guess it is the same for you, KIRMEN. It is difficult even for myself to explain it. The psychological construction of the character is not very well predefined, but at the same time, I might think I'm going to write something about a girl that is afraid of growing up, of facing the adult world. But what is not clear, and this I find out as I write, what she's going to face exactly and how she's going to react. So sometimes you are writing and things sort of come up. Some ideas are good, some others are not. Sometimes you see the character is reacting against of the psychological sort of description you had in mind, and then you have to rethink and say no. So to me, it is more clear how they are inside rather than the things that are going to happen and how they're going to react. I've also got to say that my characters are not very simple. I think usually they have a complex personality, as most of us do, I think, with many nuances, many ambiguities. I try them grow inside the book, and so they evolve. What I really like most, I think, is the psychological construction of my characters. And somebody told me that really this was an old way of doing things. I mean, this is something that was done in the 19th century, and this was a source of inspiration. And do you write backwards? I mean, says KIRMEN. I mean, if a character is doing something and then something else happens that you maybe say, okay, let's rewind, and then you redo it. Now, when I realize that the story is not evolving properly, then what I do is I do undo. Usually, I don't retouch the beginning. I'd rather undo like the middle. You don't say it's evolving this way, so let's rewind. Or you add an additional detail. Now, if I do that, it looks like a Frankenstein kind of a text. I don't do that. If you rewind and change something, you usually don't do it properly. So usually I write 200 pages the most. So any further questions? I know more of you as a poet. How was it moving from poetry to novels? Because I think it is there is a big difference. How was that journey for you? Well, thank you very much for this question. It was a very natural transfer for me, or journey. Many of us, we start writing poems because I think to write a good poem is very difficult. But to write something long when you are young, that is difficult. So I think many young writers start by poetry because it is short, and then you can focus. It is difficult to write good long text when you're only 14, 16, 17. So you start by poetry, as I did. I think I always write poetry. And I also do narrative in everything I do. I don't think there is much of a difference in between my poems and my novels or my tales. I don't think there is much of a difference. I build them in a very similar way. I think in poetry you tell less. There are more silences. But how you choose your words, how you choose your scenes, what images you want to put in your text, that is very poet-like. I follow very much the poet inside of me to write novels, and it helped a lot. Because first of all, poetry has a rhythm and music. Without music and rhythm, poetry doesn't work, and a novel either.
Bien, ¿cómo vas administrando los silencios?
And also how you manage silence. I often don't like to tell everything. I think readers are intelligent, and I like readers to add. They are reading and they've got to add their own experience to the novel. I want them to become part of it with their experiences. How do you do it? Well, by keeping things in silence, leaving empty spaces for them to jump in. I think this is a way to link different phrases. Somebody has told me that this novel is something that sort of wraps you up a little by little. Somebody told me that this is like having an oculus. And then you have a 360-degree vision, like it surrounds you. I work a lot with this style, with language. I think style, and also it goes for you, Sarah. It is very, very important. Because at the end, it is the voice that sort of leads the reader. Not only what happens, but also how it is told. What's been hard work in this novel is to differentiate the narrative voices, because the first voice, Uri's, is very much a voice that uses long sentences, very literary, and it works like a loop. It's very much like in the style of Vargas Llosa, if you allow me to say so. But the other one is more like in the style of Natalia Innsbruck, that simple way in which you tell things from the inside. Because in the first part of the novel, that is the novel within the novel, because that is the novel the writer is writing. And the second part is a letter that the writer's wife writes to a friend. So it is very different how one and the other talk to the reader and how she writes to her best friend. It is very different. So the second part is very much like in the style of Ginsberg. And Nora talks from the inside. It is a very emotional tale, and that shows, shows there is a deep link in between the two friends. There are things that are not told, but the friend understands them, even though they're not told. And I think also the reader understands that, wait, I've lost my thread, where am I?
¿Alguien más quiere preguntar alguna
Sí,
cosa,
por ahí.
comentar alguna cosa?
Hola.
Ahí.
Aquí. Pues yo tengo una pregunta a Kirmen también. Tú, como ya llevas...
You've been living in New York for many years. Has this changed something in the way you write? Because writing about Basque subjects from the Basque country, but then also from New York, and it is a very Basque novel. And now you are writing in New York about universal things, and also about Rosita. She's a European lady in New York. So do you think if you were not living in New York, could you write here that same novel in the same way? I think that moving to New York has sort of made me write in a more quiet, relaxed way, and it's given me time to write. This is incredible, isn't it? A crazy city where I have more time to write. But there I write from 9 to 2. I go to the library. I like writing surrounded by people, because I would do my homework with the whole family around and watching the TV, and I would be laying on the ground. And I like that, and I like going to the library to write. And this has given me time, distance, and peace. And I think distance helps you look at your country in a different way, to see where you come from, to look at your past. And this, New York has really contributed to this. This is why the title is The Previous Life of Dolphins. This is a Basque legend that Father Barandiaran would tell, because dolphins, he would say, used to be people, but when they fell in love with some kind of Basque mermaids, then because of a punishment or as a blessing, they turned into dolphins. So this is a metaphor, because this is like, how about when you move somewhere else? Do you change? Something changes inside of you, you become a dolphin, and you see things differently. Because when you go there, you want to place yourself in the future, you want to get used to the place, you want to become a local. But as Gaddafi said the other day, I mean, you always take your past with you. It travels with you in your luggage. So it is like a runaway, kind of, but at the same time, the writer first wants to run away from his past, not successfully, but at the end, at least if you cannot leave your past behind, you can at least get along with it. Well, Joyce wrote Ulysses surrounded by French, and still it is one of the greatest pieces of work in English. And, well, there are many people that have moved somewhere else to put some distance in relation to their traditions. Well, this has been also very good for my creativity, because New York is full of creativity, and also this not thinking about the consequences, this sort of fearless feeling, you know. People in New York, they say, why not? So I say, why not writing such a book? Why not writing a film script like this? I mean, they're fearless. They don't take into account tradition to write, the load of tradition. They start from zero. Why? Because they feel like it. And I think this has also been very important because I moved to New York. So I am freer, I am more creative. And to see things in a more objective way. Even though it is a hard city, and that shows in the book. It is not an easy city, and sometimes life is not easy there. It is not all about the lights. It is also a really, really hard city. Well, thank you very much to both of you. Then he will self-translate himself into Spanish. So we'll take it from there. Been knowing you for a while, KIRMEN. And we know your literary work. We also know your work as a musician. You have this really moving album. So what is the impact of music in your life, in your work? And whether you've got the intention to get back together and play some more music. So he repeats, what is the impact of the presence of music in your life? And whether in the middle or short term you want to get together with Rafa Bingen and play music again. Sí, sí hay.
Bai? No, bai, non aquí, ¿no? Sí. Bueno, eskerrik asko, galderagatik. Sí.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Music has always been important in my life. I've learned a lot from music. I am the fourth brother. And I would see my brothers having a hard time studying music. So I was much of a rebel since I was very young. And I told my mom I'm not going to go to a music school. So she rather took me to an arts school and I did some pottery and I had lots of fun. But I didn't learn to play any instrument and I really miss it. Awfully. I like music. I like listening to music. I like to dance. I'm not a good dancer, but I love dancing. And I like also to cooperate with friends that are musicians. In the second part of the novel, the part that is told by Nora, music plays a major role. And we mentioned many songs in the second part. Nora plays piano. She listens to many songs. She also thinks of the songs she would listen to with her friend. There is Patti Smith, Ertzanya, Itois, and many others. So I mention lots of music because I like it and I like to put it in my text in detail. There are even some lyrics. It's about getting back together. Well, yes, that might happen. Michael just sent me some music that is really excellent for his new album, and I'm going to write the lyrics. So we're very good friends. We've been friends forever, and we keep on getting along very well. And sooner or later, I will write something. Have you ever done this? You know, they send the music, and then you have to insert words. It is really beautiful to do that. And I really like the process because you have to learn the melody, and then at home they see you like repeating on your own and singing on your own and changing the words that you want to add to the music. It is a beautiful process. I really like writing lyrics, and I will go on doing that. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues yo tengo una pregunta para Sara. Aquí.
¿Dónde está?
Aquí.
Vale.
Sí, bueno, me hacía ilusión preguntarte algo y no tengo muy claro qué era lo que te iba a preguntar, pero, voy a coger algo que has dicho, que decías que los principios no lo...
I think you've said that you do not retouch the beginning much, that you'd rather change as you move on the novel. So how about the ending? How do you close a short tale or a novel? Or if there are some that are not closed, when you finish one, maybe that is also the solution to some others? So how about endings? Oh my God, you make difficult questions. I've said that I don't retouch the beginning. But a week ago, I went to Elkar in an event and I said just the opposite, and I was thinking about that. It is, terrible, because I explained that the important thing is to find the narrative of voice. You said about this boy that's under the cart, it doesn't work, I've got to get a different gaze. So usually in the first 15, 20 pages, I write them, rewrite them, and I just said previously, I don't retouch the beginning. And as I said it, I was thinking, oh my God, what did you say? But, you know, I was thinking about how you find the tone of the book, and that is difficult. But previously, what I meant is more about the plot, that is, in order to fit something in the middle, I'm not going to change completely the plot. But about the endings, well, they're complicated. Sometimes I've been told that I usually leave open endings. That is true. I always think that life is opened. There are some ends in my endings, in my books, but characters keep on living. My novels are like windows that you open and you tell something. It is like you open a window, you look through, and things were happening before you were looking through that window. And once you close the window, things keep on going on. So it is like you open and you close a window. I don't like an ending to be like a conclusion. I could do more spectacular endings, for sure. And some novels, I'm thinking about un amor, a love, and there is lots of tension, and I might have, have done something else. I could have, written a different ending, and in the text it is even more so that, because, it is like a fixed image. This is something and that's it. I don't know if this is the right answer, but I think endings are complicated. Recently, because you're always learning, and I did something new. I wrote the ending. Usually I never do that. I write my book and I retouch this and that, but the overall flow goes with the writing from the beginning to the end, even though there are some chronological jumps inside the book. But I wrote the ending, and I've never done it, and so far it's quite of a disaster. But I don't think you have to always do things in the same way. And I don't know what you think, KIRMEN, but sometimes you've published different books and you've got some behind you, and me too. There's this fear, the fear to do something that is too easy, because you know what you're good at. And you no longer run risk. You might repeat the same formula, and it might not work out that good. So sometimes it might become something automatic that you are not even aware of. I think you have to pay attention not to feel too comfortable. And this is why you do this that I've done now, that I decided to, first of all, write the ending. That is a disaster, by the way. But it's because I wanted to do something else. I really like the end of Un Amor, when she's sitting on the rock and she feels the ants climbing on her hand. It doesn't matter even if you take the end. If you tell the end, it doesn't matter. It's okay, you're spoiling the book, it doesn't matter. It was a super poetical image. I mean, her feeling the ants at the very end, I find it beautiful. If you had you finished by saying, well, somebody dies or whatever, I don't think I would have liked that much. Sometimes when it's too much of a drama, you go like, oh my God, no. When you really see that the writer wanted to put an end to the book, I don't like it that much. Well, this is not Carver or Chekhov. They never close. They leave it open. This ending with 3 pink yellow roses, this I can tell about. The protagonist dies. Chekhov dies, and the tale ends with the room man. They were drinking champagne, and he sees a cork. He will collect the cork, takes the cork, and goes away. And that is incredible. Nothing happens. But that says a lot about the psychology of people, or also that other ending when the blind the blind man shows this other man to draw a cathedral. Well, this is a tale. I'm going to tell you this tale briefly. So there is this couple, and then the wife's friend that is blind appears. So the husband gets a bit nervous. How about a friend? How did you meet him? This and that. So, no, not good. What did you do with him? Did you have an affair or not? You know. And then the husband, well, the wife leaves, and the husband and the blind man remain, and they're watching TV, and then he says, "You've never seen a cathedral." He is not friendly to the blind man at all. But then the blind man makes him draw a cathedral. It is beautiful. They put the two hands together, and he teaches him how to draw a cathedral. Elkar, are you somewhere around there? It is a beautiful ending about two men in, and between them in the beginning there was lots of tension, and then they put their two hands together to draw a cathedral. It is beautiful. I don't know, I think we should go for these kind of endings. It is very nice, these 19th century endings that are like, that's it. But I like these open endings a lot. And tension, I think, resides somewhere else. It is not in what happens. Well, this is like the spoilers. Recently, I watched a film that I advise you to watch. It is called The Death by Mr. Lazarescu. He's always sick in a hospital, another hospital. But you get into the story, and then suddenly you reach the end of the film and he dies, and you go like, oh my God. And the title was The Death of Mr. Lazarescu. So why are you shocked? But really, you get so much into the experience that you don't expect him to die, even though the title was The Death of Mr. Lazarescu. So I don't believe in spoilers, because as I've said in the beginning, for a viewer or a reader, you just get into the story and you live through it. So nobody can spoil it, unless, well, it is a story that has a different kind of effect. But in this kind of films or books, it is not the case.
No sé, creo que ya llevamos...
I think time is up. It's 8:10, so last question. Otherwise, we call this a conference.
Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias a los dos por...
Well, thank you very much to both of you. Thank you for sharing how you curate a narrative. Sarah, I have a question for you, because I'm not going to excuse Kirmen for saying that Chekhov died. So you've got Carrere. I like him a lot. I don't know if he's a paradigm of self-fiction, but anyway, I no longer think he is himself, because I don't mind whether he lies more than he talks, or if he shows or hides more. What do you think about somebody writing in such a way, you writers? Well, knowing how much is truth in what a writer writes, I think it is a mere anecdote. I'm thinking about Kafka, for example. I am reading his memoir with like 1,400 pages. It is really interesting because, like almost everybody, I admire Kafka. this man, he didn't travel, but he grew inwards. There's lots of him in every of his titles. In the book, it is very well explained where he got this scene, this idea. But if you put together, I mean, if you put together all these different information, all this information, even if you do not know whether things are true or not, whether what the sister said was based on something that really the sister said, maybe at the time it was curious to know, but once time, adds to the tale, it doesn't really matter. That's what I think. I think Carrière is really amazing, and he's an excellent poet. No. Are you talking about, who are you talking to, about Carver or Carrière? Who are you talking about? Yeah, about Carrere, pronounced in Spanish. Well, it's different, it's difficult to hear with the distance, the names. But I think Limonov is the best book by Emmanuel Carrère. And I like him when he doesn't talk that much about himself, because sometimes he's a bit of a narciso. But even though, when he is that, he's interesting. He's very interesting, I think. Last question, please. You've mentioned the word migrant. Maybe when you moved to New York, it's about your family. And I think Anglo-Saxons use the word expat. Have you thought about that? Are you an expat or a migrant? What do you think about those words? Well, of course, this is for KIRMEN, this question. No, I see myself more of a migrant than an expat. Do you keep nowadays the relationship with your origin, but also with people that are somewhere else in the world? I'm always curious about how my characters travel, how they move from point to another. So Bilbao, New York-Bilbao is like from Bilbao airport to the JFK. So there's always a person that travels through different places, because I think migration is what defines human beings. We think we are connected to a place and that is going to be there forever, but then things have happened and it's no longer the case. And even that change helps us add more facets to our personalities. I'm talking about migrants, but with full respect. Full respect to people that have to migrate due to serious reasons. It is not the same when you move to New York because you get a grant that when you cross Rio Grande and you are a wetback. I mean, it is totally different, of course. I mean, there are financial migrants of people fleeing wars. It is not the same. I'm not really gone away from here. I'm still here. Even though I am in New York, I am here. It is as if I was really living here. And also as if I was living in New York. Now with social media, it is easier to keep the connection. But you leave a change, that is true. And you've left something behind that is no longer the same. It will never be the same. But I also think that a person's identity changes as a year go by, as you meet new people, you read new things, you get to have more experiences. And that identity is never something static, things add to it. I even add identities. I think I am like an addition of identities. I'm not just one identity. I am the result of an addition of identities, and I like it. I think we call this conference.
Muchas gracias. Clavado, ¿eh?
50 segundos. Gracias. Eskerrik asko. Bueno, nos vamos, ¿no?